There's nothing quite like the pain of being thrown away by the people who were supposed to love you most. When your own blood decides you're not worth keeping, it leaves scars that never fully heal. Alina knew this pain better than most when her family left her on the doorstep of Mr. Vento, a man they thought would be her punishment. They were wrong. At 63, Vento had spent 40 years as the city's most feared crime boss. He'd built his empire on silence and respect, making problems disappear with just a phone call. But federal agents were closing in, and his past was catching up fast. Then Alina arrived, quiet, broken, and nowhere else to go. What her family meant as cruelty became his chance at redemption. But when a lifetime of enemies comes calling, can a man who's only known how to destroy learn to protect the one person who might actually save him? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, 30 floors above the city that Antonio Vento had ruled for 4 decades. From his leather chair behind the mahogany desk, he could see the lights of the harbor where his first shipment had arrived in 1983, back when he was still hungry, still angry, still foolish enough to believe that power was the same thing as respect. Now, at 63, he understood the difference. The girl sat in the corner of his office, knees drawn to her chest in the oversized armchair, still wearing the same clothes she'd arrived in 3 hours ago, soaked through from the storm, shivering not just from cold, but from something deeper, the kind of bone-deep fear that comes from having nowhere left to run. Her dark hair clung to her face, and those green eyes hadn't stopped moving since Marcus had brought her up from the lobby, cataloguing every exit, every potential threat. Smart girl. In his world, paranoia was a survival skill. Vento reached into his desk drawer, his fingers brushing against the vintage photograph he kept there, his wife Maria holding their daughter Sophia, both of them laughing at some joke he could no longer remember. They'd been gone 22 years now, taken by a drunk driver on a Tuesday morning while running errands. The same Tuesday he'd been across town, finalizing a deal that would double his territory and triple his enemies. He'd built an empire on their graves, telling himself it was what they would have wanted. That was the lie he'd been living with ever since. "You hungry?" he asked, his voice gentler than he'd used in years. Alina looked up, those green eyes wide with suspicion. She shook her head, but her stomach betrayed her with a low growl that echoed in the quiet office. Vento reached for his phone, pressing the speed dial for his housekeeper. "Sophia, yeah, it's me. Could you bring up some of that soup you made yesterday? And maybe some fresh bread?" He paused, studying the girl's thin frame. "Enough for 2, the intercom on his desk buzzed. "Mr. Vento?" Marcus's voice carried its usual note of controlled tension. Agent Chen called. "She wants to schedule another meeting. Tell her I'm busy." She was pretty insistent, boss. "Something about new evidence." Vento closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 40 years pressing down on his shoulders. The federal task force had been circling for 18 months now, ever since that warehouse fire in Brooklyn had exposed 3 decades of carefully buried secrets. Agent Sarah Chen was relentless, methodical, and unfortunately very good at her job. She'd already frozen half his assets and turned a dozen of his associates into informants. "Schedule it for Thursday," he said finally. "And Marcus, make sure our guest has everything she needs." There was a pause. "Boss, are you sure about this?" "Having her here complicates things." Vento looked at Alina, who was pretending not to listen, while clearly hanging on every word. "Some complications are worth it." After Marcus signed off, Vento stood and walked to the window, his reflection ghost-like against the storm outside. In the glass, he could see Alina watching him, no longer afraid but curious now, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Your father," he said without turning around, "owes me money. A lot of money. You know this." "I figured it was something like that." Her voice was steadier than he'd expected, with a slight rasp that suggested she didn't use it much. "He never was good with money, or responsibility." Or she stopped herself, as if loyalty was a habit too hard to break even now. "He left you with a note." Vento turned back to face her. Said you were payment for his debt. Said you'd be useful for... He couldn't finish the sentence. Some words were too ugly to speak aloud, especially to a girl who'd already been broken enough. Alina's laugh was bitter, older than her 22 years. Useful, that's one way to put it. Sophia arrived with a tray of steaming bowls and fresh, crusty bread, her maternal instincts immediately zeroing in on Alina. At 68, Sophia Moreno had been keeping Vento's house, and occasionally his soul, for the better part of 20 years. She'd raised 5 children of her own before her husband died, and she'd come to work for a man who needed mothering more than he'd ever admit. Mija, she said, setting the tray down and immediately going to Alina. Your skin and bones. When did you last eat a real meal? Alina allowed herself to be fussed over, probably the first genuine kindness she'd experienced in months. As Sophia bustled around, adjusting cushions and checking the temperature of the soup, Vento saw something in the girl's face that he recognized, the desperate gratitude of someone who'd forgotten what caring looked like. Sophia takes care of everyone in this house, Vento said, settling into the chair across from Alina. She's been trying to fatten me up for 20 years, with very little success. 23 years. Actually, Sophia corrected, shooting him a look, and you're too stubborn to take proper care of yourself. Maybe this young lady will have better luck getting you to eat regular meals. The easy domesticity of the moment felt surreal. Here he was, one of the most feared men on the East Coast, having soup with a girl whose father had tried to sell her to pay off gambling debts. Outside, federal agents were building a case that could put him away for life. Somewhere in the city, Vincent the Crow Moretti was planning God only knew what kind of revenge. And yet, for the first time in years, Vento felt something that might have been peace. Tell me about your family, he said as they ate. Alina's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Not much to tell. Dad gambles, Mom drinks, and my brother Tommy thinks he's going to be the next great American novelist while living in their basement. They never wanted me around much. She searched for the right words. I was the mistake that reminded them of better days, I guess. The casual way she dismissed her own worth made something tight and angry coil in Vento's chest. He'd killed men for lesser insults, but this girl spoke about her own abandonment, like she was discussing the weather. Their loss, Sophia said firmly, placing a protective hand on Alina's shoulder. Any family that would throw away a beautiful girl like you doesn't deserve to call themselves family at all. Alina's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. I kept thinking they'd change their minds. Even when Dad was driving me over here, I thought... She shook her head. Stupid, not stupid, Vento said quietly. Hopeful. There's a difference. They finished their meal in comfortable silence, the storm outside beginning to ease. When Sophia cleared the dishes, she whispered something in Spanish to Alina that made the girl smile for the first time since she'd arrived. A real smile that transformed her entire face. She says, "You have kind eyes." Sophia translated for Vento's benefit. She's right. They're your mother's eyes. After Sophia left, Vento showed Alina to the guest room, a space that had been Maria's art studio, then Sophia's bedroom, then a shrine, and finally just an empty room where he stored memories. Now looking at it through Alina's eyes, he realized how sterile it had become. Tomorrow he'd have Sophia add some personal touches, make it feel less like a hotel and more like home. The bathroom's through there, he said, pointing to the adjoining door. Sophia left some clothes that should fit. If you need anything at all, just pick up the house phone and dial 7. That goes directly to my room. Alina sat on the edge of the bed, testing the mattress with obvious surprise. This is nicer than anywhere I've ever lived. Good. You'll be comfortable here. She looked up at him, studying his face with those perceptive green eyes. Why are you being nice to me? I mean, really. Not because of my father's debt or whatever he owes you. Why? It was a fair question, and one he wasn't sure he could answer honestly, not to her, maybe not even to himself. How could he explain that seeing her abandoned on his doorstep had awakened something he'd thought died with his family? That her quiet resilience reminded him of his daughter's stubborn courage? That maybe, just maybe, protecting her was his last chance to be something other than a destroyer? Because, he said finally, everyone deserves a chance to be wanted. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Alina nodded slowly, as if she understood more than she was saying. "Mr. Vento," she said as he turned to leave. "Antonio. Just Antonio." "Antonio." She tested the name, her slight accent making it sound musical. "Thank you. For the soup, for the room, for—" She gestured vaguely at the comfortable surroundings. "For treating me like a person instead of a thing." Something cracked inside his chest, a fissure in the armor he'd built around his heart. "Get some sleep, Alina. Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." As he closed her door and walked back to his office, Vento felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders, different from the weight of power, lighter and yet somehow more significant. For 40 years, he'd been responsible for territory, for money, for fear. Now, he was responsible for hope. Back in his office, he pulled out the photograph of Maria and Sophia, studying their faces in the lamplight. "I don't know what I'm doing," he whispered to their memory. "But I think this might be important." Through the windows, the city sparkled in the aftermath of the storm, washed clean and gleaming with possibility. Somewhere out there, Agent Chen was building her case. Somewhere else, old enemies were plotting his downfall. But up here, 30 floors above it all, a broken girl was falling asleep in a safe bed for the first time in years, and for tonight, that felt like enough. The call came at 4:30 in the morning, jarring Vento from the first peaceful sleep he'd had in months. Marcus's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Boss, we got problems. The feds hit the warehouse on Pier 17. They took everything, files, computers, even the coffee machine." Vento sat up, immediately alert. The warehouse was supposed to be clean, a legitimate shipping operation that had been scrubbed of any criminal connections years ago. If Agent Chen had found something there, it meant someone had been very sloppy or very unlucky. How much did they get? Too much. There was some old paperwork in the basement office that should have been destroyed. Records from the Torino job in '98? Vento's blood went cold. The Torino job was the kind of thing that could put him away forever. The kind of thing that had 3 witnesses, all of whom had been permanently silenced. Except now, apparently, the paperwork had survived. Get our lawyer on the phone. And Marcus. Double security on the building, today. 20 minutes later, Vento stood in his kitchen, mechanically brewing coffee, while his mind raced through possibilities and contingencies. Through the doorway, he could see Alina curled up on the living room couch, having apparently migrated there during the night. She looked impossibly young in Sophia's borrowed clothes, peaceful in a way that made him want to shield her from everything ugly in the world. The kitchen window exploded inward. Vento threw himself sideways as glass showered the granite countertops, his hand already reaching for the pistol he kept in the bread box. But instead of bullets, a single white business card fluttered to the floor, landing face up among the glittering shards. Vincent the Crow Moretti. The embossed black lettering seemed to mock him from the kitchen tiles. What was that? Alina appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with alarm. "Get away from the windows," Vento said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Now!" She moved without question, backing into the interior hallway while he examined the card. On the back, someone had written in Moretti's distinctive scrawl, "Time to settle accounts, old friend." "I know about the girl." Vento felt something cold settle in his stomach. Vincent Moretti had been his partner once, back in the early days when they were young and hungry and stupid enough to think loyalty meant something in their world. That partnership had ended badly 20 years ago, with Moretti fleeing the city one step ahead of both the law and Vento's rage. If Moretti was back, it meant trouble on a scale that made federal investigations look like parking tickets. "Antonio." Alina's voice was smaller now, uncertain. "Is someone trying to hurt us?" The word "us" hit him like a physical blow. When had she become part of his world? When had protecting her become as natural as breathing? Maybe, he said honestly. I need to make some calls. Stay in the center of the apartment, away from all the windows. Marcus arrived within the hour, bringing a cleanup crew and a glazier who worked exclusively for people who valued discretion. While they swept up glass and measured for new bulletproof windows, Marcus briefed Vento on what he'd learned. Moretti's been back in the city for 3 weeks, Marcus said, his weathered face grim. Staying at the Meridian under the name Vincent Morrison. He's been asking questions about your operations, your assets. And about the girl. How does he know about Alina? Her father. Seems like dear old Dad has been running his mouth about his arrangement with you. Probably hoping to score some sympathy points with anyone who'll listen, Vento cursed under his breath. In his 40 years in the business, he'd learned that family was usually the weakest link in any operation. Blood didn't guarantee loyalty, and desperation made people do stupid things. There's more, Marcus continued. Agent Chen's task force isn't just looking at old murders. They're building a RICO case, trying to connect you to everything from loan sharking to human trafficking. If Moretti's feeding them information, he wouldn't work with the feds, Vento interrupted. Vincent's got too much pride for that. Maybe, but he's got plenty of reason to want you destroyed. That was true enough. 20 years ago, Moretti had tried to expand their operation by partnering with a Colombian cartel. A move that would have brought unwanted attention and inevitable violence to their territory. When Vento had refused, Moretti had gone behind his back, setting up a deal that ended with 2 dead federal agents and a massacre that made national headlines. Vento had given his old partner a choice: disappear forever or join the federal agents in the morgue. Moretti had chosen exile, but apparently 20 years was long enough to nurse a grudge. What's his play? Vento asked, same as it always was. He wants your territory, your connections, your reputation. But now he's got leverage. Marcus nodded toward the living room, where Alina sat reading one of the books from Vento's shelves, seemingly oblivious to the danger surrounding her. She's not leverage, Vento said quietly. She's family, Marcus raised an eyebrow. The older man had been with Vento for 15 years, long enough to know that his boss didn't make emotional decisions lightly. You sure about that? Because protecting her is going to complicate everything. The feds, Moretti, your own people, they're all going to see her as a weakness to exploit. Let them try. The phone rang before Marcus could respond. Vento glanced at the caller ID and felt his jaw tighten. Unknown number, which in his experience usually meant trouble. Antonio. The voice on the other end was exactly as he remembered, smooth, cultured, with just a hint of the old neighborhood accent that neither of them had ever quite managed to lose. Vincent. Vento kept his own voice level, professional. I got your message, did you? Good. I was worried the glass might have been too subtle. Moretti chuckled, the sound bringing back memories of late nights and shared ambitions. Back when they'd thought they could conquer the world together. You're looking well, by the way. Retirement suits you. What do you want? What I've always wanted. What's mine? What you stole from me 20 years ago. You made your choice, Vincent. You chose to run. I chose to live. There's a difference. The warmth left Moretti's voice, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. But I'm done running, Antonio. I'm done watching you live in luxury while I scrape by in exile. It's time to balance the books. Through the living room doorway, Vento could see Alina looking up from her book, concern creasing her brow as she sensed the tension in his voice. The books were balanced 20 years ago, Vento said. You walk away now, they stay balanced. Oh, but that's where you're wrong, old friend. The books are very much unbalanced. You see, I know about your little federal problem. I know Agent Chen has been asking very pointed questions about very old business. I also know about your new house guest. Sweet girl. Reminds me of Sophia, actually. The mention of his dead daughter's name made Vento's grip tighten on the phone. You leave her out of this. I'm afraid that's impossible. You see, she's already in it. The moment you decided to play house with Daddy's gambling debt, you made her part of our world. And in our world, Antonio, everyone pays their debts eventually. The line went dead. Vento stared at the phone for a long moment. his mind already shifting into the tactical mode that had kept him alive for 4 decades. Moretti wasn't just back for revenge, he was back for everything. The territory, the respect, the empire that Vento had built, while his former partner rotted in exile, and now Alina was caught in the crossfire of a war that had been building for 20 years. "Marcus," he said without taking his eyes off Alina, "call everyone in. Full security detail around the clock. And get Sophia somewhere safe. What about the girl?" Vento watched Alina turn a page in her book, completely absorbed in whatever story she was reading. For a moment he allowed himself to imagine a different world, one where he could protect her simply by keeping her close, where love was stronger than violence, where good intentions were enough to overcome bad history, but he'd lived too long in the real world to believe in fairy tales. "She stays with me," he said finally. "Or whatever happens, she stays with me." The bulletproof windows arrived by noon, along with 2 additional security guards who took positions in the lobby and parking garage. Vento had lived with the threat of violence for so long that precautions felt like breathing. Automatic, necessary, unremarkable. But watching Alina's reaction to the sudden transformation of their peaceful penthouse into a fortress made him see it through different eyes. She said nothing as technicians installed motion sensors and panic buttons, but he caught her studying the new locks on the doors, the way the guards' hands rested casually near their weapons, the subtle tension that now hummed through the apartment like an electrical current. "It's temporary," he told her as they sat down for lunch. "Just until we sort some things out. Things like Vincent Moretti." Vento's fork paused halfway to his mouth. "You were listening. Hard not to." "You weren't exactly whispering." She met his eyes steadily. He knew Sophia's name. "Your daughter." The fact that she'd noticed that detail, remembered it, and understood its significance told him more about her intelligence than any conversation could have. "Alina might be young, but she wasn't naive. Vincent was my partner once," Vento said carefully. "A long time ago. We had a falling out, the kind of falling out that involves bulletproof windows. The kind that involves people making very bad decisions and living with the consequences." Alina nodded, as if this made perfect sense, which perhaps it did in the world she'd grown up in. Her own family had certainly made their share of bad decisions. That afternoon, while Sophia fussed over dinner preparations and Marcus coordinated security rotations, Vento found himself doing something he hadn't done in decades. Teaching someone to defend themselves. Not the brutal combat training he'd received in his youth, but basic awareness, simple techniques that might buy precious seconds in a crisis. "Your father never taught you any of this?" he asked, as he showed her how to palm strike someone's nose. "My father never taught me much of anything useful," Alina replied, practicing the movement with surprising focus. "He was better at creating problems than solving them." They worked in the penthouse gym, a space that had been gathering dust since Vento's doctor had started making pointed comments about his blood pressure. Alina was naturally graceful, with quick reflexes and an intuitive understanding of leverage that surprised him. "You've done this before," he observed as she executed a perfect hip throw on the practice. "Dummy. My brother Tommy went through a martial arts phase when we were kids. I used to watch him practice, copy the movements when no one was looking." She straightened, brushing hair from her face. "He quit after 2 months, said it was boring. But I kept practicing in my room." "Smart girl." The compliment made her smile, not the cautious, grateful expression he'd been seeing, but something genuine and pleased. It struck him that she probably hadn't received many compliments in her life, which seemed like a crime against nature. Sophia appeared in the doorway, watching them with approval. "Bueno, a woman should know how to protect herself. My grandmother used to say that a lady's best weapon is her brain, but her second best is a good right hook." "Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman," Vento said. "She survived 3 revolutions and 5 husbands. Wisdom was a necessity." That evening, as they shared dinner around the kitchen table, something Vento hadn't done in years, Sophia regaled them with stories of her grandmother's adventures during the Mexican Revolution. Her animated storytelling had Alina laughing, really laughing, for the first time since she'd arrived. Watching her face transform with genuine joy, Vento felt something shift in his chest. This girl who'd been thrown away like garbage was revealing herself to be remarkable, intelligent, resilient, surprisingly funny when she felt safe enough to speak freely. Her family's inability to see her worth wasn't just negligent. It was blindness on a criminal scale. Later, as Sophia cleared the dishes, Alina's phone buzzed with a text message. Her face went tight as she read it, the easy happiness evaporating like morning mist. "Bad news?" Vento asked gently. "It's from my mom." Alina's voice was carefully neutral. "She wants to know if I'm settling in well with my new arrangement." The air quotes she made were bitter. "She says she hopes I understand why they had to do what they did." "Do you?" "Understand, I mean." Alina was quiet for a long moment, staring at the phone screen. "I understand that they needed money more than they needed me. I understand that in their minds I was the logical sacrifice because I was the one who contributed least to the family." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "What I don't understand is how a parent stops loving their child. How do you just turn it off?" The pain in her voice was raw, immediate, and it triggered something protective and fierce in Vento's chest. He'd killed men who'd hurt him less than Alina's family had hurt her with their abandonment. "You don't," he said quietly. "Real love doesn't work that way. What they feel for you, what they've always felt, that's not love. It's ownership. They're angry because their property isn't performing the way they expected." Alina blinked, startled by his bluntness. "But you're not property," Vento continued. "You're a person. A remarkable person who deserves to be loved for who you are, not discarded because you don't meet someone else's expectations." "Antonio, I know what it's like to lose family," he said, cutting her off gently. "When Maria and Sophia died, I thought I'd never care about anyone again. I built walls, kept people at a distance, told myself it was safer to be alone." He glanced toward the living room, where the photograph of his wife and daughter sat on the side table. "I was wrong. Being alone isn't safer, it's just lonelier." Alina followed his gaze to the photograph. "They were beautiful. They were everything." His voice caught slightly. "Sophia would have liked you. She had your stubborn streak, your way of seeing through people's nonsense." "How old was she?" 21. "Same age as you, almost." The parallel wasn't lost on either of them. "She was studying to be a teacher. Said she wanted to help kids who didn't have anyone in their corner." They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the city hummed with its usual evening energy, but up here, 30 floors above it all, the world felt smaller, safer. "Can I ask you something?" Alina said finally. "Of course. Why do you keep my father's debt alive? I mean, you could have just handled him the way people like you usually handle debts that can't be paid." It was a fair question, and a perceptive one. In the old days, a man who welched on gambling debts to Antonio Vento would have found himself at the bottom of the harbor. "Because," Vento said after a moment, "his stupidity brought me something precious. Sometimes the worst decisions lead to the best outcomes." Alina's smile was soft, wondering. "You really think I'm precious?" "I think," Vento said carefully, "that you're exactly what this old house needed. What I needed, even if I didn't know it." Later, as she got ready for bed, Alina paused in the doorway of her room. Their room now, really. Since she'd begun adding small personal touches that made it feel lived in rather than sterile. "Antonio? Thank you. For the self-defense lesson, for dinner, for—" She gestured vaguely at the safety and warmth surrounding them. "For making me feel like I matter." "You do matter," he said firmly. "Don't ever doubt that." After she closed her door, Vento stood in the hallway for a long moment, listening to the quiet sounds of her settling in for the night. In 3 days, this broken girl had somehow become the most important thing in his world. Not because she filled the hole left by Sophia's death, nothing could do that, but because she'd reminded him that he was capable of something other than destruction. In his leather-bound journal, Alina wrote about this realization late into the night, her pen moving across the pages as she tried to capture the strange miracle of being wanted, being protected, being home. 3 days later, Alina found the silver locket. She'd been looking for extra pillows in the linen closet when her fingers brushed against something small and metallic tucked behind the towels. The locket was delicate, old-fashioned, with an intricate pattern of roses etched into its surface. Inside was a photograph of a little girl, with dark hair and laughing eyes. Sophia, at maybe 7 years old, missing her front teeth in a gap-toothed grin. Vento found her sitting on her bed, holding the locket with the careful reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. Sophia must have put it there, he said softly, though they both knew that wasn't true. She always said Sophia would have wanted her things to find someone who needed them. I can't take this, Alina whispered. It's too important. It's exactly important enough. Vento sat beside her on the bed, his weathered hands gentle as he lifted the locket's chain. May I? She nodded, lifting her hair so he could fasten the clasp around her neck. The weight of it settled against her chest like a blessing, warm and comforting. She had your curiosity, he said, studying the photograph. Always asking questions, always wanting to understand how things worked. Maria used to joke that Sophia would take apart the universe if she could, just to see what made it tick. Tell me about her. About both of them, so he did. Sitting there in the afternoon light, filtering through the bulletproof windows, Vento told her about Maria's laugh, about Sophia's stubborn streak, about Sunday dinners and bedtime stories, and all the small moments that had made his house a home. He told her about the morning they died, about the phone call that shattered his world, about the 22 years he'd spent trying to fill the silence they'd left behind. I used to think that losing them was my punishment, he said finally, for the choices I'd made, the life I'd built. I told myself that men like me didn't deserve happiness. Do you still think that? Vento looked at her, really looked at her. The frightened girl who'd arrived 4 days ago was still there, but she was being replaced by someone stronger, more confident, someone who belonged in this space, who made it feel like home again. I think, he said carefully, that maybe redemption isn't about deserving it. Maybe it's about recognizing it when it arrives. That evening brought unexpected news. Agent Chen had called, requesting a meeting, but not the adversarial interrogation Vento had expected. Instead, she wanted to talk about Vincent Moretti. He's been busy, Marcus reported after taking the call. Reaching out to your old associates, asking questions about current operations. The word on the street is he's building something big. What kind of something? The kind that ends with you dead and him running your territory. Vento wasn't surprised. Vincent had never been subtle, never been patient. If he was back, it was because he believed he could win, which meant he had resources, allies, or information that Vento didn't know about. There's something else, Marcus continued. Agent Chen thinks there might be corruption in her task force. Someone's been feeding information to outside parties. Names of informants, details about ongoing investigations. Moretti. Maybe, or maybe someone else entirely. Either way, it means we can't trust what we think we know about federal operations. The implications were troubling. If there was a leak in the task force, it meant that Moretti had access to real-time intelligence about federal activities. He would know which operations were compromised, which evidence was solid, which witnesses were talking. It also meant that Agent Chen's investigation into Vento's activities might be the least of his problems. Later that night, while Alina helped Sophia with dinner, Vento received a call that made his blood run cold. The voice was young, nervous, with the distinctive accent of someone who'd grown up in the same neighborhood as Vento himself. Mr. Vento. This is Tommy Reeves, Alina's brother. Vento stepped into his office, closing the door. What do you want, Tommy? It's not what I want, sir. There's been some men asking questions about Alina, about where she went, what kind of arrangement you have with my father. What kind of men? The kind that carry guns and don't take no for an answer. They came by the house yesterday, talked to my parents for about an hour. Mom's been drinking more than usual since then, and Dad's scared. Really scared. Despite everything the Reeves family had done to Alina, Vento felt a flicker of concern. They were foolish, selfish people, but they didn't deserve whatever Vincent Moretti had planned for them. Did they give names? No, sir, but one of them, the older guy, he had this scar running from his left ear down to his collar. And his eyes were— Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. They were the kind of eyes that have seen too much, you know. Vento knew exactly what he meant. He'd seen those eyes in the mirror for 40 years. Tommy, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Take your parents somewhere safe. Family out of state, a hotel, anywhere that's not your usual routine. Do it tonight. Sir, I don't think they'll make them understand that their lives depend on it. And Tommy, don't contact Alina. Don't call here. Don't send messages. Any communication puts her in danger. After he hung up, Vento stood at his office window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere down there, Vincent Moretti was moving pieces on a chessboard, preparing for a game that had been 20 years in the making. The federal investigation was pressure, but Moretti was pure danger, the kind of enemy who knew all your weaknesses because he'd helped create them. And now, Alina's family was caught in the crossfire of a war they couldn't possibly understand. Antonio? Alina's voice came from behind him. Is everything okay? He turned to find her in the doorway, wearing one of Sophia's aprons over her jeans, flour dusting her hands from helping with the bread. The silver locket caught the lamplight, and for a moment, he could almost see Sophia in her place, older, but with that same caring expression, that same instinctive understanding that something was wrong. Just business, he said, forcing a smile. How's dinner coming? Sophia says I have natural talent for cooking, but I think she's just being kind. Alina stepped into the office, studying his face with those perceptive green eyes. You look worried. I'm always worried about something. It's part of the job description. She moved closer, her presence somehow both soothing and energizing. Is it something I should be worried about? Vento considered lying, considered maintaining the fiction that she was safe, that their peaceful domesticity could continue indefinitely. But Alina deserved honesty, deserved to understand the reality of the world she'd entered. Maybe, he said finally, there are people who want to hurt me, and by extension, they want to hurt anyone I care about. That includes you now. Good thing you're teaching me to defend myself. Her matter-of-fact acceptance of the danger surprised him. Most people, faced with the reality of violence, either panicked or retreated. Alina simply nodded, processing the information like any other practical consideration. I won't let anything happen to you, he said. I know. She smiled, touching the locket at her throat. But Antonio, you don't have to protect me alone. We're family now, right? Family protects each other. The word family hit him like a physical force, bringing with it the weight of love and responsibility he'd thought he'd never feel again. Looking at this remarkable girl who'd somehow found her way into his heart, Vento realized that Vincent Moretti had miscalculated something crucial. He thought Alina was Vento's weakness, but she might just be his greatest strength. The safe house was a cramped apartment in Queens, worlds away from the penthouse's luxury. Alina paced the small living room like a caged animal, her restlessness growing with each passing hour. 2 days had passed since Marcus had moved her here for her own protection, and every minute felt like a year. This is ridiculous, she said to the guard stationed by the window. I'm safer with Antonio than I am hiding in some basement apartment. The guard, a taciturn man named Eddie, who looked like he bench-pressed cars for fun, didn't respond. He'd been maintaining professional silence since her arrival, which only added to her frustration. Back in Manhattan, Vento was having his own crisis. The chest pains had started during a meeting with his accountant, sharp and sudden enough to make him grip the edge of the conference table. Marcus had wanted to call an ambulance, but Vento had refused. Hospitals meant records, questions, vulnerability he couldn't afford. Instead, Dr. Raymond Kellerman made a house call. At 72, Kellerman had been patching up criminals longer than most people had been alive. His discretion as legendary as his skill. Your blood pressure is through the roof, Kellerman said, checking his equipment. When did you last take your medication? I've been busy dying, apparently. Kellerman's bedside manner had never included sugarcoating. Antonio, you've had 2 minor heart attacks in the past 6 months. Your body is telling you to slow down. Can't slow down. Not now. Then at least take the damn pills. Kellerman packed his bag with efficient movements. And get some rest. Real rest, not that 4 hours a night nonsense you call sleep. After the doctor left, Vento sat alone in his office, staring at the prescription bottles that represented everything he'd been trying to ignore. At 63, he was no longer the young man who could run on adrenaline and coffee. His body was betraying him just when he needed strength most. The encrypted phone Marcus had given him buzzed with a message. Package delivered. Crow still circling. Agent Chen's investigation had taken an unexpected turn. Her team's analysis of financial records had uncovered something troubling. Payments flowing from known criminal enterprises to federal accounts, suggesting corruption at the highest levels of law enforcement. Someone's been feeding information to Moretti. Chen told Vento during their clandestine meeting in Central Park, "We think it goes back years, maybe decades." They walked slowly along the reservoir path. Two enemies temporarily united by a common threat. Chen was younger than he'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of focused intelligence that reminded him of his daughter. "Vincent always did have friends in interesting places," Vento said. "Even back when we were partners. Tell me about the partnership. What do you want to know?" "Everything. How it started, how it ended, why he wants you dead now." Vento was quiet for a long moment, watching joggers circle the water. "We were young, stupid, thought we could change the rules of the game. Vincent had vision but no patience. I had patience but not enough vision. For a while we balanced each other out. What changed? He got greedy. Wanted to expand into territories that would have brought too much heat, too much attention. When I said no, he went behind my back." Vento's voice hardened. "That kind of betrayal, in our world, it usually ends in blood. But you let him live. I gave him a choice. Disappear forever or join the people he'd gotten killed. He chose wisely. And now he's back. Vento agreed. "And he's not the same man who ran 20 years ago. Exile changes people, makes them harder, more desperate." Chen stopped walking, turning to face him directly. "He's planning something big, isn't he? Something that requires taking you out first. Vincent never did anything small. If he's back, it's because he thinks he can win everything. My territory, my reputation, my legacy." Vento met her eyes. "And he's probably right." Meanwhile, Alina's family was discovering that ignorance wasn't always bliss. The men who'd visited them had returned, this time with less subtle questions and more explicit threats. Tommy found his mother crying in the kitchen, his father locked in the bedroom with a bottle of whiskey and a loaded gun. "They want to know everything about Alina's arrangement," his mother sobbed. "What she's doing, what she knows, whether she's seen any documents or overheard any conversations." "What did you tell them?" "The truth. That we don't know anything, that we just wanted her gone." She looked up at her son with red-rimmed eyes. "Tommy, I think we made a terrible mistake." At the safe house, Alina had given up pacing in favor of staring out the small window at the alley below. The apartment felt like a tomb, airless and confining. She'd tried calling Antonio 3 times, but Marcus had blocked her number for security reasons. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent most of her life feeling trapped by her family's indifference, and now she was trapped by someone's care. The silver locket felt heavy against her chest, a reminder of the family she'd found and might be losing. Her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Alina." The voice was unfamiliar, older, with a slight accent she couldn't place. "Who is this?" "A friend of your father's. My name is Vincent. I think it's time we talked." Every instinct Vento had taught her screamed danger, but something in the man's tone made her hesitate. He sounded tired, almost sad. "I don't talk to strangers." Wise policy. "But I'm afraid circumstances have made us more than strangers. You see, my dear, you're living in the house that should have been mine, protected by the man who destroyed my life. I think that gives us quite a lot to discuss." Alina's grip tightened on the phone. "You're Vincent Moretti." "I am. And you're the girl who's managed to do something I thought impossible. You've made Antonio Vento care about someone other than himself. That's quite an accomplishment." "What do you want?" "To meet you. to explain some things about the man you've come to trust, to offer you choices that Antonio never will. I'm not interested in your choices, not even the choice to save his life." The words hung in the air like a blade. Alina could hear her own heartbeat in the sudden silence. "You see," Moretti continued, "Antonio's not a young man anymore. His health is failing, his empire is crumbling, and he has powerful enemies closing in from every direction. But you could change all of that. You could be the key to everyone's survival by betraying him, by understanding the truth. Meet with me, Alina, 1 hour, somewhere public, completely safe. Let me show you documents that will explain exactly what kind of man has been playing father to you. Against every lesson Vento had taught her, against every instinct screaming in her head, Alina found herself asking, where? Because sometimes, she realized, the only way to protect the people you love is to understand exactly what you're protecting them from. The coffee shop in Midtown was exactly what Moretti had promised. Public, crowded, safe. Alina sat in a corner booth, her hands wrapped around a cup she hadn't touched, watching the entrance while her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd left the safe house by climbing out the bathroom window, a skill she'd learned during her teenage years of escaping family drama. Vincent Moretti didn't look like a monster. He was smaller than she'd expected, maybe 5'8", with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He could have been someone's grandfather, the type who handed out candy at church and remembered birthdays. Only the way he moved, precise, controlled, and constantly aware of his surroundings, hinted at the danger beneath the gentle facade. "You're braver than I expected," he said, sliding into the booth across from her. "Or more foolish. In our business, the two are often indistinguishable. I'm not in your business." "No? Then what would you call living under Antonio Vento's protection? Learning his secrets, becoming part of his world?" Moretti's smile was almost paternal. "My dear girl, you were in our business the moment your father made his deal." He placed a manila folder on the table between them. "These are copies of federal documents, police reports, witness statements. Everything your surrogate father has never told you about his past." Alina stared at the folder without touching it. "Why show me this?" "Because you deserve the truth. Because a young woman's life shouldn't be built on lies and manipulation." Moretti's voice carried genuine warmth. "Antonio has spent 40 years perfecting the art of making people believe he's their protector. But protection and possession are often the same thing, aren't they? He's not possessing me. He's controlling your environment, limiting your contacts, teaching you to distrust everyone except him." Moretti shook his head sadly. "Classic behavior. I've seen it before." Against her better judgment, Alina opened the folder. The first document was a police report from 1987, describing the murder of 3 dock workers who'd been trying to organize against mob influence. Photos showed bodies dumped in the East River, execution-style wounds, families destroyed. "The Torino job," Moretti said quietly. "Antonio's first major kill. He was 26, ambitious, eager to prove himself to the old-timers. Those men had wives, children. They were just trying to make honest livings." The next document detailed a series of loan shark operations, complete with testimonies from victims who'd lost their homes, their businesses, their hope. Page after page of human misery, all bearing Antonio Vento's signature or fingerprints. "This is what built his empire," Moretti continued. "Not respect or honor, or any of the romantic nonsense he might have told you. Fear, violence, the systematic destruction of anyone who stood in his way." Alina's hands trembled as she turned pages, seeing photos of crime scenes, reading victim statements, understanding for the first time the full scope of the man who'd become her father figure. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because, my dear, you have a choice to make. You can continue living in his gilded cage, pretending that love can wash away 40 years of blood. Or you can help me end this cycle of violence once and for all, by betraying him, by saving him." Moretti leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Antonio is dying, Alina. His heart is failing, the federal investigation is closing in, and his own people are losing faith. He has maybe 6 months before everything collapses. But there's another way. He pulled out a second folder, this one containing what looked like legal documents. A deal I've negotiated with certain federal authorities. Full immunity for Antonio in exchange for his cooperation in dismantling the larger network of organized crime on the East Coast. He gets to retire quietly, keep enough money to live comfortably, and most importantly, he gets to live. And what do you get out of this? Justice, closure, the chance to prevent more families from being destroyed. Moretti's voice hardened slightly. And yes, I get my territory back. The territory that was rightfully mine before Antonio decided to play judge and jury. Alina closed the folders, her mind reeling. Everything Moretti had shown her aligned with things she'd suspected, details that hadn't quite added up in Antonio's stories about his past. But something felt wrong about this whole encounter, some instinct warning her that she wasn't getting the complete truth. How do I know you're not just using me? How do you know Antonio isn't using you? Moretti countered. Think about it, Alina. What are the odds that a man like him would suddenly develop paternal feelings for a stranger? Isn't it more likely that you represent something useful, a way to appear sympathetic to federal investigators, a humanizing element in his defense strategy? The words hit like physical blows, awakening doubts she'd been suppressing since she'd arrived at the penthouse. Had Antonio's kindness been genuine, or was she just another chess piece in a game she didn't understand? Meanwhile, back at the penthouse, Vento was discovering Alina's disappearance. Marcus delivered the news with professional detachment, but his concern was evident. Eddie lost contact 2 hours ago. When backup arrived, they found the bathroom window open and no sign of struggle. She left voluntarily, Vento said, sinking into his chair. The chest pains were back, sharper now, radiating down his left arm. Boss, we need to consider that she might have been compromised. Moretti could have... No. Vento's voice was firm despite his physical distress. Alina's not a victim. She's making her own choices, even if they're dangerous ones. Agent Chen arrived within the hour, bringing news that complicated everything. Her investigation had uncovered evidence of a massive money laundering operation involving 3 federal judges and a dozen law enforcement officials. The corruption went deeper than anyone had suspected. Moretti's been building this network for years, she explained, using his exile to create connections, gather intelligence, buy loyalty. He's not just coming back, he's orchestrating a complete takeover of organized crime on the East Coast. Using me as the catalyst, Vento said quietly. Using you as the scapegoat. Every unsolved murder, every unexplained disappearance, every crime that couldn't be pinned on anyone else, it's all going to be blamed on you. Meanwhile, he steps in as the reformed criminal, the cooperative witness who helps clean up the mess. Vento pulled out the hand-drawn map he'd been working on. Detailed layouts of the city's underground tunnel system, escape routes and safe houses from his early days. The paper was yellowed with age, covered in his careful notations. He'll need me alive for that to work, Vento said, studying the routes. Dead martyrs are harder to blame than live scapegoats, which means Alina is safe. For now, unless she decides to trust him. Vento folded the map carefully. Vincent was always persuasive. He has a gift for making people believe their betrayals are really acts of love. At the coffee shop, Moretti was making his final pitch. I need you to get me into the penthouse, Alina, just once, for 30 minutes. There are documents in Antonio's safe that will prove everything I've told you. Evidence of crimes that will put him away forever unless we can destroy it first. And if I do this, then you save the man you've come to love. He gets his deal, his freedom, his chance at redemption. All it costs is 30 minutes of access and your willingness to see the truth. Alina stared at the folders, at the evidence of Antonio's violent past, at the promise of his peaceful future. Outside the coffee shop, the city moved with its usual rhythm, unaware that a young woman was about to make a choice that would determine whether love or justice would prevail. In the end, it came down to trust, and the terrible realization that sometimes protecting the people you love means making decisions they would never forgive. Agent Chen found the original partnership contract in her father's effects, a box of personal items she'd avoided opening for 15 years, ever since Special Agent David Chen had died in what was officially ruled a car accident but had never felt quite right to his daughter. The document was yellowed with age, dated 1983, bearing 3 signatures: Antonio Vento, Vincent Moretti, and D. Chen. The federal seal in the corner made her blood run cold. Her father had been there inside. "Man, this changes everything," she told Vento when they met that evening at the same Central Park bench where they'd begun their uneasy alliance. The revelation felt like a betrayal of everything she'd believed about her father's integrity, his dedication to law enforcement, his death. "Your father was a good man caught in an impossible situation," Vento said quietly, studying the contract in the lamplight. Vincent had something on him, gambling debts, maybe a family member in trouble. David never wanted to be part of our world, but he was. For how long? 5 years. From 83 to 88. He fed us information about federal investigations, warned us when raids were coming, helped us stay one step ahead of the law. Vento's voice carried genuine regret. "He saved a lot of lives, actually. Ours and yours. Violence was always Vincent's first solution. But your father convinced us that intelligence was better than warfare." Chen felt the ground shifting beneath everything she'd believed about her family. Her career, her crusade against organized crime. What happened in 88? Vincent got greedy. Started planning operations that would have gotten people killed. Not just criminals, but civilians. Maybe even federal agents. Your father tried to stop him, threatened to expose the whole arrangement if Vincent didn't back down, so Moretti killed him. Made it look like an accident. Brake failure on a rainy night. Vento handed the contract back to her. "I didn't know for sure until years later, but by then Vincent was gone, and your father was already buried. I'm sorry, Sarah, he deserved better." The truth hit her like a physical blow. Her entire career, her relentless pursuit of justice, her determination to bring down men like Vento, it had all been built on the lie of her father's innocence and the assumption of Vento's guilt. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Because you were doing good work. Because the system needed agents like you. Because your father's mistake didn't have to define his daughter's life." Vento's voice was gentle. "He made one bad choice and spent 5 years trying to atone for it. That's more than most of us manage." Meanwhile, at the coffee shop, Alina was coming to her own terrible realization. Something about Moretti's story had been nagging at her. A detail that didn't quite fit with everything she'd learned about Antonio's character. "You said my father came to you first," she said, looking up from the documents. "That he offered me as payment for his debts." "That's correct. But Antonio told me the opposite. He said my father owed him money, that I was delivered as collateral." She closed the folder firmly. "One of you is lying." Moretti's kindly expression flickered for just a moment, revealing something harder underneath. "Perhaps Antonio's memory is clouded by sentiment. Or perhaps he's trying to make himself look better in your eyes. Or perhaps you're the one clouding the truth." Alina stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "I think this meeting is over." "Sit down, Alina." The command in Moretti's voice was unmistakable now, all pretense of grandfatherly concern stripped away. "You haven't heard the most important part yet." Something in his tone made her hesitate. Around them, the coffee shop continued its normal rhythm, but she suddenly felt very alone, despite the crowd. "Your father didn't volunteer you as payment," Moretti said, his voice low and intense. "He begged me not to take you, offered everything else he had, his house, his car, his wife's jewelry. But I needed you specifically, Alina, not for Antonio's debt, but for what you represent, which is leverage against the one man who could destroy everything I've built." Moretti pulled out a photograph. Her father as a young man, standing beside 2 other men she now recognized as Antonio and Moretti himself. "You see, your father wasn't just a gambling addict who got in over his head. He was Special Agent David Chen's partner in the federal task force investigating organized crime in the 1980s. The world tilted. Alina gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what she was hearing. That's impossible. Agent Chen would have recognized. Agent Chen never met you before you started living with Antonio. And why would she connect a girl named Alina Reeves with her father's deceased partner, Detective Michael Reeves? Moretti's smile was cold now, predatory. Your father changed his name after Agent Chen died, moved to a different state, tried to disappear. But you can't hide from the past forever. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Her father's paranoia, his drinking, his inability to hold steady employment. The way he'd always seemed to be running from something she couldn't understand. My father witnessed Agent Chen's murder, she whispered. Your father helped plan Agent Chen's murder, Moretti corrected. He was the one who sabotaged the car, who made sure David Chen would be driving alone that night, who provided the perfect alibi for what looked like a tragic accident. No, he wouldn't. He would, and he did. Because I had something he valued more than his conscience. He had a 2-year-old daughter who could disappear just as easily as a federal agent. Moretti leaned back, studying her reaction. For 20 years, your father kept quiet about what really happened that night. But now he's getting old, getting sloppy, getting guilty. And Agent Chen's daughter is asking uncomfortable questions. So you're using me to silence him. I'm using you to control Antonio, who's the only person left alive who can connect me to Agent Chen's death. Your father was always weak, but Antonio has principles that make him dangerous. Alina felt sick, understanding now why Antonio had looked at her with such protective intensity from the very first day. He hadn't just seen a girl who needed saving, he'd seen the daughter of a murdered colleague. The child of a man who'd been forced to choose between family and justice. But here's the beautiful part, Moretti continued. Antonio doesn't know about your connection to David Chen. He thinks you're just Michael Reeves' daughter, a random victim of circumstances. If he knew the truth, if he understood that protecting you means protecting the man who helped kill his federal contact. Well, even Antonio's principles have limits. You're going to tell him. I'm going to let you tell him. Tonight, when you return to the penthouse, you're going to explain exactly who you are and exactly what your father did. And then you're going to watch as Antonio realizes that everything he's felt for you, everything he's risked for you, has been built on the blood of a good man who died trying to do the right thing. Moretti stood, smoothing his jacket with casual precision. Love is such a fragile thing, don't you think? It can survive almost anything, except the complete destruction of trust. As he walked away, leaving Alina alone with the terrible weight of truth. She understood that Vincent Moretti had been playing a much longer game than anyone had realized. This wasn't about territory or revenge or even justice. This was about destroying Antonio Vento's soul, one revealed secret at a time. Alina returned to the penthouse at midnight, her hands shaking as she used the key Antonio had given her. The apartment was dark, except for the lamp in his office, where she found him slumped over his desk, surrounded by documents and maps, looking older than his 63 years. I was beginning to worry, he said without looking up. Marcus said you'd disappeared from the safe house. We need to talk. Something in her voice made him raise his head, studying her face with those perceptive dark eyes. That sounds ominous. She sat across from his desk, the same place where they'd shared soup on her first night, when everything had seemed so much simpler. The silver locket felt heavy against her chest, weighted with the knowledge of everything she was about to destroy. My father's real name is Michael Reeves, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But 20 years ago, he was Detective Michael Reeves, partner to Special Agent David Chen. The color drained from Antonio's face. He set down the pen he'd been holding, his movements careful and controlled. Alina, Vincent Moretti told me everything. About the partnership, about the corruption, about what really happened the night Agent Chen died. She met his eyes, refusing to look away despite the pain she saw there. My father helped plan the murder, Antonio. He sabotaged the car because Moretti threatened to kill me if he didn't. The silence stretched between them, heavy with betrayal and broken trust. When Antonio finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. I know. What? I've known since the second day you were here. Agent Chen showed me your father's military records, his police service record. It wasn't hard to connect Michael Reeves to Detective Reeves once I knew what to look for. Alina felt the ground shift beneath her. You knew. This whole time you knew what my father did, and I still protected you. I still cared about you. Because you weren't responsible for your father's choices. Antonio stood slowly, moving to the window that looked out over the city. Your father was a good man, forced into an impossible situation. He made a terrible choice to save his daughter's life. I can't say I wouldn't have done the same, but he helped kill Agent Chen, your federal contact. The man who was trying to save all of us from Vincent's ambitions, Antonio finished. Yes, I know. And yes, it matters. But it doesn't change what you mean to me. Alina felt tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. Moretti said you'd hate me when you found out. He said love couldn't survive that kind of betrayal. Vincent always underestimated the power of choice. Antonio turned back to her, his expression gentle despite the pain in his eyes. You didn't choose your father's actions. You didn't choose to be used as leverage. But you did choose to tell me the truth, even knowing it might destroy everything between us. Agent Chen arrived an hour later, carrying her father's Medal of Honor in a small wooden box. The medal gleamed in the lamplight as she placed it on Antonio's desk, a symbol of service, sacrifice, and the thin blue line between order and chaos. This was the only thing of his I kept, she said, her voice thick with emotion. He won it in Vietnam, before everything went wrong. Before Vincent Moretti corrupted him and used him and killed him. She looked up at Antonio. I want you to have it, Sarah, not as a gift. As a pact. She opened the box, revealing the star-shaped medal with its blue ribbon. My father made one terrible choice that defined the rest of his life. But he spent 5 years trying to atone for it, trying to protect people, trying to minimize the damage. Her voice hardened. Moretti destroyed him for it. He destroyed Detective Reeves too. He's been destroying lives for 40 years, and it has to stop. Antonio picked up the medal, feeling the weight of its history. What are you proposing? Alliance. Full cooperation. We use everything we know about Moretti's operations to bring him down permanently. She gestured toward the maps spread across his desk. You know his methods, his contacts, his weaknesses. I have federal resources and legal authority. Together we can end this. Marcus entered the office, his expression grim. Boss, we got movement. Surveillance spotted Moretti's people positioning around the building. Looks like they're setting up for something big. How many? At least a dozen, maybe more. Professional-grade equipment, military coordination. Marcus paused. And boss, they've got someone on the inside. Building security just went offline. The pieces of Moretti's plan were finally becoming clear. He wasn't just planning to destroy Antonio's reputation or steal his territory. He was planning to eliminate everyone who could connect him to David Chen's murder. Antonio, Agent Chen, even Detective Reeves and his daughter. One coordinated strike to erase 20 years of evidence. We need to evacuate, Agent Chen said, already reaching for her phone. I can have federal backup here in 30 minutes, Antonio interrupted. We don't have 30 minutes. He turned to Alina, his expression torn between protectiveness and pragmatism. There's a service elevator that goes down to the parking garage. Marcus knows the route to the safe house on... No! Alina's voice was quiet but firm. I'm not running anymore. Not from Moretti, not from the truth, not from whatever this is between us. She touched the silver locket at her throat. You told me once that family protects each other. That goes both ways. Alina, this isn't your fight. Yes, it is. Moretti made it my fight the moment he decided to use me as a weapon against you. My father made it my fight when he chose my life over Agent Chen's. She stood, moving to the window that looked down on the street where Moretti's forces were gathering. But most importantly, You made it my fight when you chose to love me, despite everything. Outside, the first grey light of dawn was beginning to touch the horizon. In a few hours, the sun would rise on whatever remained of their world. Federal agents were mobilizing, criminals were taking positions, and in the center of it all, three people bound together by blood, betrayal, and unexpected love were preparing to make their final stand. Antonio pulled out a secure phone, dialing numbers he hadn't used in years. Old associates, former enemies, people who owed him favors or feared his memory. If Vincent Moretti wanted a war, he would get one. But first, there was one more call to make. Tommy, it's Antonio Vento. Get your parents somewhere safe. Tonight, everything ends. Dawn came like a blade across the Manhattan skyline, and with it, the sound of breaking glass 30 floors below. Antonio pressed the rosary beads into Alina's hands, the same worn wooden beads that had belonged to his wife Maria, carried through 40 years of violence and loss. They were warm from his touch, smooth from decades of desperate prayers. These kept Maria safe through the worst times, he said quietly, closing her fingers around them. She always said faith wasn't about believing in miracles. It was about believing that love was stronger than fear. Alina felt the weight of the beads, understanding that this wasn't just protection, but legacy, the passing of something sacred from one generation to the next. Antonio, the lights went out. Emergency power kicked in a moment later, bathing the penthouse in an eerie red glow. Through the reinforced windows, they could see muzzle flashes in the building across the street, Moretti's snipers taking out the streetlights, creating shadows and confusion. Marcus, report, Antonio said into his headset. They've breached the lobby. Professional entry, military precision. I count at least 15 hostiles, and that's just the ones we can see. Marcus's voice was steady despite the circumstances. Building security is completely compromised. They've got control of the elevators, the stairwells, everything. Agent Chen coordinated with her task force from Antonio's office. Her voice clipped and urgent as she called in federal backup. ETA 20 minutes on tactical support. SWAT is staging 2 blocks out, but Moretti's people have the building surrounded. 20 minutes might as well be 20 hours, Antonio muttered, checking his weapon one last time. At 63, with a failing heart and trembling hands, he wasn't the soldier he'd once been. But some battles couldn't be fought with youth and strength. They required wisdom, experience, and the kind of desperate love that made ordinary people do extraordinary things. The first explosion came from the service elevator shaft, a controlled blast that sent vibrations through the entire building. Moretti wasn't just coming for them. He was bringing down their sanctuary, floor by floor. They're cutting off escape routes, Marcus observed, moving to the reinforced door. Classic siege tactics. Force us into a confined space, eliminate options, make us desperate. He's not trying to capture us, Antonio realized. He's trying to bury us. Along with all the evidence, all the witnesses, all the connections to David Chen's murder, Alina positioned herself at the communication station they'd set up, coordinating between Marcus's defensive positions and Agent Chen's federal resources. Her fingers flew over the radio controls with surprising competence, another skill learned during years of navigating her family's chaos. Agent Chen, this is Alina. Marcus needs to know the positions of your perimeter teams. Can you patch me through to your tactical commander? Alina, you shouldn't. I'm the only one here who isn't emotionally compromised, she said firmly. Antonio's protecting his past. You're avenging your father. Marcus is following orders. But I can see the bigger picture. She was right. As bullets began to shatter the reinforced windows and smoke grenades rolled across the floor, Alina became the calm center of the storm, relaying information, coordinating defenses, making split-second decisions that kept them all alive. The second wave came through the ventilation system, gas canisters designed to disorient and confuse. Marcus had prepared for this, sealing the air intake and switching to emergency oxygen, but the psychological effect was still devastating. They were trapped in a tomb of their own making, fighting an enemy they couldn't see against odds they couldn't calculate. "Vincent!" Antonio's voice carried across the chaos as he activated the building's intercom system. "This is between us. Let the others go." Moretti's laughter echoed through the speakers, distorted and terrible. "Oh, my old friend, this stopped being between us the moment you decided to play house with Detective Reeves' daughter. You see, I've spent 20 years planning this moment, 20 years gathering the resources to destroy not just you, but everything you represent. What I represent. Hope, the possibility of redemption. The lie that men like us can change, can be forgiven, can find peace." Moretti's voice hardened. "You've spent 4 decades convincing yourself that you're different from me, that your violence had meaning, that your love could wash away the blood on your hands. Tonight you learn the truth. We're all monsters, Antonio. The only difference is that I've stopped pretending otherwise." The main assault began at exactly 5:47 a.m. They came through the windows on rappelling lines, through the service doors with shaped charges, through the ceiling with military precision. Moretti had recruited professionals, former special forces, mercenaries, the kind of soldiers who fought for money rather than country or cause. Marcus met them at the first barricade, his weathered face set with grim determination. At 58, he'd served Antonio faithfully for 15 years, and he wasn't about to stop now. The hallway erupted in gunfire, the sound deafening in the confined space. "Fall back!" he shouted, blood streaming from a graze across his forehead. "Second position!" Agent Chen's federal training kicked in as she took cover behind Antonio's desk, returning fire with mechanical precision. Each shot was calculated, controlled, professional, but there were too many targets, too much chaos, too many variables beyond her control. "Where's that backup?" Antonio demanded, his own weapon adding to the defensive fire. 10 minutes out," she replied. "Maybe less." Alina watched it all from her position at the communications hub. The rosary beads wrapped around her wrist, her fingers never stopping their coordination of the defense. She could see what the others couldn't. The pattern in Moretti's assault, the way his forces were moving, the ultimate objective of their positioning. "He's not trying to kill us," she said suddenly. "He's hurting us." "What?" "Look at the attack pattern. They're driving us toward the East Wing, toward your private office. He wants us in a specific location." Antonio's face went pale as he understood. His private safe, the one containing 40 years of documentation, evidence, and records. Moretti needed access to that safe, needed the contents to complete his takeover of the criminal network. But getting to the safe meant going through them. And Vincent Moretti had never been afraid to walk through blood to get what he wanted. The brass key hung heavy in Antonio's hand, an ornate piece that had belonged to his father, passed down through 3 generations of men who'd built their lives on secrets. Behind the painting of the Last Supper, his private safe contained more than money or documents. It held the original evidence of Vincent Moretti's crimes, carefully preserved for 40 years, as insurance against exactly this moment. "Alina," he said, pressing the key into her palm. "Whatever happens, you get to that safe. The combination is Sophia's birthday, March 15th, 1980. Inside, there's a red folder marked Torino. Everything Vincent has done, everyone he's hurt, it's all documented there. I'm not leaving you. You're not leaving me. You're saving me." His hands framed her face, and for a moment the gunfire faded to background noise. "This is what family does. We protect each other's legacy," Marcus's voice crackled through the radio. "Boss, they've breached the inner perimeter." 2 minutes, maybe less. Vincent Moretti appeared in the hallway like a ghost made flesh, flanked by 6 armed men. At 65, he was still elegant, still dangerous. But there was something hollow in his eyes, the kind of emptiness that came from 20 years of nursing hatred instead of healing. "Hello, Antonio." Vincent. They faced each other across 30 feet of marble floor. 2 old men whose partnership had defined 4 decades of crime and violence. Behind Moretti, federal agents were finally breaching the building's lower levels, but they were still minutes away from reaching the penthouse. "You know what I want," Moretti said conversationally. "The contents of your safe. Every record, every photograph, every piece of evidence you've been hoarding like a paranoid old man. And then you die quietly, and I become the cooperative witness who helps Agent Chen's task force solve her father's murder." Moretti's smile was cold. Amazing how helpful a reformed criminal can be when he's willing to testify against his former partners. Agent Chen stepped into view, her weapon trained on Moretti's chest. "Vincent Moretti, you're under arrest for the murder of Special Agent David Chen, conspiracy to commit murder, and about 50 other federal charges. Agent Chen, you have your father's eyes." Moretti didn't seem concerned by the gun pointed at him. "I'm curious, has Antonio told you how your father really died?" "I know enough, do you? Do you know that your father tried to back out at the last minute? That he called me the night before, begging me to find another way?" Moretti's voice carried genuine sadness. "He loved you, Sarah. Everything he did, every compromise he made, it was all to keep you safe from people like me." "Stop talking." He was crying when he sabotaged the car. "Did you know that? Crying for the man he was about to kill, crying for the daughter who would grow up thinking her father was a hero." Moretti took a step closer, ignoring the weapons trained on him. "Your whole career has been built on avenging a lie. The moment of distraction was all his men needed. Smoke grenades rolled across the floor, automatic weapons erupted, and the penthouse became a war zone. Marcus threw himself between Antonio and the incoming fire, his body jerking as bullets found their mark. He hit the ground hard, blood spreading across the marble, but his voice was steady. "Go. Get to the safe." Alina moved like liquid shadow, using the chaos and smoke to reach the east wing. Behind her, she could hear Antonio and Agent Chen fighting a desperate rearguard action, their voices coordinating over the radio she'd helped establish. The painting was exactly where Antonio had described it, Leonardo's masterpiece hanging in his private study, concealing 40 years of carefully preserved secrets. Her fingers trembled as she worked the combination 031580, Sophia's birthday, the daughter who died too young, whose memory had somehow led to this moment of redemption. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside was exactly what Antonio had promised. Folders full of evidence. Photographs, documents, and recordings that detailed Vincent Moretti's criminal empire. But there was something else. Something that made her breath catch. Adoption papers, already filled out, bearing her name and Antonio's signature. He'd been planning to make it official, to legally claim her as his daughter. Family, she realized, wasn't just about protection. It was about continuation, about passing something good from one generation to the next. Well, the little bird has found her way to the nest. Moretti stood in the doorway, alone now, his weapon lowered. Behind him, she could hear federal agents finally reaching the penthouse level, their voices coordinating the final assault. "You know what's in that folder," he said quietly. "Evidence that will put me away forever. Evidence that will also destroy your father, prove his complicity in David Chen's murder. I know. So you have a choice. Alina, you can hand over that evidence and watch your father spend the rest of his life in prison for a crime I forced him to commit. Or you can destroy it, save the man who gave you life, and let an old criminal fade away quietly." Alina looked down at the red folder in her hands, understanding the terrible choice Moretti was offering. Justice for Agent Chen meant destroying Detective Reeves. Protecting her biological father meant letting her surrogate father's enemy escape. "There's a third option," she said finally. "Which is?" "The truth. All of it." She pulled out her phone, activating the recording function. "Vincent Moretti, do you confess to the murder of Special Agent David Chen?" For the first time in 40 years, Vincent Moretti looked genuinely surprised. "You're recording this? Do you confess to threatening Detective Michael Reeves and his 2-year-old daughter to force his cooperation? Do you confess to orchestrating a criminal conspiracy that lasted from 1983 to 1988? Moretti studied her face, seeing something there that made him smile. not his cold, predatory expression, but something almost genuine. "You know, I think I underestimated you, little bird. You're not choosing between justice and family. You're choosing both. Do you confess?" "Yes," he said quietly. "To all of it." "David Chen was a good man trying to do the right thing. Your father was a scared cop trying to protect his child. And I was a monster who destroyed them both for profit." The sound of federal agents breaching the final door echoed through the penthouse. Agent Chen's voice carried over the radio. "Suspect in custody. We need medical assistance for the wounded." But Vincent Moretti wasn't going anywhere. He sat down heavily in Antonio's chair, looking every one of his 65 years. "Why?" Alina asked. "Why confess now?" "Because, my dear, some games can only end one way. And because watching you choose courage over convenience reminded me of something I'd forgotten. There used to be honor among thieves." Through the windows, the sun was rising over Manhattan, washing the penthouse in golden light. In a few hours, the federal task force would have everything they needed. Detective Reeves would be granted immunity for his cooperation. Agent Chen would have justice for her father's murder. And Antonio Vento would finally be free to build something good from the ashes of his violent past. Family, Alina realized, wasn't about blood or law or even love. It was about choosing every day to protect what mattered most. 3 months later, the adoption papers lay spread across the kitchen table like promises kept, each signature a testament to the family they'd chosen to become. Antonio's handwriting was still shaky from his surgery, the triple bypass that had saved his life and given him a future he'd never expected to see. "Alina Sofia Vento," he read aloud, testing how the name sounded in the afternoon sunlight streaming through the new windows. "Has a nice ring to it." Alina smiled, touching the silver locket at her throat. "Sophia would have approved, I think. She would have loved you." His voice carried the warmth of absolute certainty. "Just like she would have loved seeing her old room filled with college textbooks instead of ghosts." The penthouse had been transformed in the months since Vincent Moretti's confession and subsequent conviction. Gone were the bulletproof barriers and armed guards, replaced by bookshelves, plants, and the comfortable clutter of people actually living rather than merely surviving. The walls that had once displayed abstract art now held family photographs, candid shots of their unconventional household, formal portraits from Alina's college orientation, pictures of Marcus teaching her to change a tire in the parking garage. Agent Chen visited twice a week for dinner, bringing case files and stories about her father that helped heal wounds none of them had expected to close. She'd taken to calling Antonio Tio, a nickname that had started as a joke but evolved into genuine affection. The federal task force had been disbanded after Moretti's conviction, but Chen had been promoted to head a new unit focusing on organized crime corruption. She brought her work home sometimes, spreading files across Antonio's former war room, now converted into a bright office space where Alina studied and Chen pursued justice with surgical precision. Marcus sat at the head of the table, his left arm still in a sling, but his spirits remarkably intact for a man who'd taken 3 bullets defending his chosen family. The physical therapy was progressing well, though he complained endlessly about the exercises while secretly pushing himself harder than the doctors recommended. "You know," he said, cutting into Sophia's famous roast chicken with one-handed expertise, "I always thought retirement would be boring. Turns out I was wrong." "You're not retired," Sophia corrected, bustling around the kitchen with the authoritative energy of someone who'd never met a problem she couldn't solve with food and fierce love. "You're promoted. Head of household security and official grandfather to whatever grandchildren these two give me someday." The comment made Alina blush and Antonio chuckle. At 68, Sophia had embraced her role as family matriarch with enthusiasm that bordered on the evangelical. She'd already started converting one of the spare bedrooms into what she called the nursery for when the time comes, despite Alina's protest that she was only 23 and focused on her education. "Mia," Sophia would say with the patient wisdom of someone who'd raised 5 children and buried one husband, Love doesn't wait for convenient timing. When God sends you family, you make room. The easy domesticity of the moment still felt miraculous to Antonio. For 40 years, his dinner table had been a place for planning violence, calculating odds, preparing for war. Now it was where Alina spread her criminology textbooks, where Agent Chen worked on cold cases, where Marcus taught everyone to play poker with unprecedented gentleness. The dining room had become command central for an entirely different kind of operation, the daily logistics of people who genuinely cared about each other's well-being. Detective Michael Reeves had visited once, 6 weeks after the trials ended. The meeting had been awkward, painful, necessary. A conversation between two men who'd made terrible choices for understandable reasons. He'd brought flowers for Sophia, apologies for Antonio, and a cardboard box of Alina's childhood belongings that her mother had finally decided to part with. "I don't expect forgiveness," he'd said, sitting in the same chair where Alina had eaten her first meal in this house. "I just wanted to thank you for protecting my daughter when I couldn't. You were protecting her too," Antonio had replied. "You just did it the only way you knew how." They talked for 2 hours about David Chen's integrity, about the impossible position Moretti had created, but the weight of choices that echo through decades. When Reeves left, he'd quietly asked if he could send birthday cards. "Of course," Antonio had said. "Family's complicated enough without making it more difficult." Now those birthday cards sat on Alina's dresser, alongside acceptance letters from 3 universities and a framed photograph of her graduation from victim services training. She decided to major in social work, specializing in helping children from broken families find their way to safer ground. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The girl who'd been abandoned was now training to help other abandoned children. Following in Sophia's footsteps, she'd explained when Antonio had asked about her career choice. She wanted to help kids who didn't have anyone in their corner. Seems like a good way to honor her memory. The decision had required considerable financial adjustment. Antonio's legitimate businesses were thriving. The federal investigation had actually helped by forcing him to streamline operations and eliminate questionable partnerships. But supporting a college student while paying for Marcus's medical care and maintaining their expanded household meant careful budgeting, a concept that had been foreign to him for decades. Strange how much more satisfying money is when you earn it honestly, he'd told Agent Chen during one of their evening conversations. "I used to think legitimate business was just organized crime with better paperwork. Turns out there's actually dignity in building something that helps people instead of exploiting them." Vincent Moretti had been sentenced to life without parole, his cooperation with federal authorities earning him nothing more than a marginally more comfortable cell. His criminal empire had collapsed within weeks of his arrest, dismantled by the very evidence he'd spent 20 years trying to destroy. The power vacuum had been filled not by violence, as everyone expected, but by legitimate businesses and community organizations that had been waiting decades for the opportunity to operate without criminal interference. Sometimes, Antonio wondered if his former partner found any peace in prison, any redemption in finally telling the truth. Agent Chen had visited Moretti once, 6 months after his conviction, hoping to understand the man who'd destroyed her father. She'd returned thoughtful but not satisfied. "He's not sorry," she'd reported. "Not for the crimes, not for the lives he destroyed, not even for getting caught. He's just tired. 20 years of exile, 20 years of anger, 20 years of planning revenge. It hollowed him out. There's nothing left but the shell of who he used to be." Probably not, but the wondering itself felt like progress to Antonio. The fact that he could consider his former partner's well-being without hatred, could acknowledge the waste of a brilliant mind corrupted by power, suggested healing he'd thought impossible. Agent Chen entered the dining room, carrying a bottle of wine and the satisfied expression of someone who'd just closed another case. "The Torino files led to 3 more arrests this week," she announced, settling into her regular chair. "Turns out Vincent's records were even more comprehensive than we'd hoped." We've identified corruption networks in 12 cities, going back 15 years. Good, Antonio said simply. Some conversations didn't require elaborate commentary, and justice delayed was still justice delivered as they shared their meal, the weekly tradition that had somehow become the center of their rebuilt. In World, Antonio found himself studying the faces around the table. Marcus, loyal and steadfast, had become the brother he'd never had, the kind of friend who'd take bullets without hesitation and argue about baseball statistics with equal passion. His physical therapy was progressing ahead of schedule, though he still insisted on doing twice the recommended exercises just to be safe. Sophia, maternal and fierce, was the keeper of their collective soul, the one who remembered birthdays and insisted on regular medical checkups, and somehow managed to make their strange household feel like the most natural thing in the world. She'd started attending English classes at the community center, determined to improve her grammar for when the grandchildren start asking complicated questions. Agent Chen, dedicated and healing, had transformed from enemy to ally to something like a daughter-in-law. Though no one had officially acknowledged that particular relationship yet, she'd started bringing her laundry on Sundays, claiming the machines in her building were broken, though everyone suspected she simply enjoyed the company. Her relationship with Marcus had evolved from professional respect to something warmer, more personal, built on shared experiences and complementary strengths. And Alina, beautiful, brave, impossibly wise Alina, who'd somehow managed to save them all by refusing to choose between love and justice, between family and truth. She'd grown into herself over these months, developing confidence that came not from external validation, but from the security of being unconditionally loved. Her grades were excellent, her professors impressed, her future bright with possibilities that extended far beyond the limitations her original family had tried to impose. "You know what I realized today?" she said, as if reading his thoughts. "I spent 22 years wondering what was wrong with me, why my family couldn't love me. But there was never anything wrong with me. There was something wrong with them, their capacity for love, their ability to see value, their willingness to fight for what mattered." "And now?" Antonio asked, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Now I know what real family feels like. It's not about blood or obligation or debt. It's about choice. Every single day we choose to be here for each other. We choose to forgive mistakes, to celebrate successes, to weather problems together. That's what makes us real." The conversation continued as they finished dinner, touching on Alina's upcoming semester, Marcus's physical therapy milestones, Chen's latest cases, and Sophia's campaign to convince them all to take a family vacation to Puerto Rico. The easy intimacy of people who'd chosen to build a life together, who'd survived crisis and emerged stronger, who understood that family was a verb rather than a noun. After dinner, as Sophia cleared dishes with her usual efficient grace, and Marcus settled in front of the television for his evening news ritual, Antonio and Alina stood on the balcony watching the sunset over Manhattan. The city sprawled beneath them, 8 million people living their own stories of loss and redemption, heartbreak and hope. The balcony had been renovated too, the bulletproof glass replaced with clear panels that offered an unobstructed view of the city. Potted plants lined the railing, Sophia's influence, and comfortable furniture invited lingering conversations. This had become their special place, father and daughter, where they processed the day's events and planned for tomorrow's possibilities. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up your old life, taking on my name, becoming part of this complicated family?" Alina was quiet for a long moment, watching the lights begin to twinkle in the gathering dusk. The question had layers, practical concerns about sacrificing independence, emotional risks of loving people who'd lived violent lives, social complications of being associated with his reputation. "Even after his transformation, you want to know what I regret?" she said finally. "I regret that it took 22 years to find you. I regret that Sophia and Maria never got to meet the granddaughter they would have loved. I regret that your heart had to nearly stop before you learned how to really live. She turned to face him, the silver locket catching the last light of day. Behind them, through the glass doors, they could see their family settling into their evening routines, Marcus muttering at the television, Sophia humming while she finished the dishes, Agent Chen spreading case files across the dining table, but choosing you. Choosing this life, this family, this chance to be loved for who I really am, instead of what I can provide. She shook her head firmly. I'll never regret that. Not for a single second. Inside the apartment, they could hear Sophia humming an old Spanish lullaby while she finished in the kitchen, the same song she'd sung to her own children decades ago, now offered as comfort to the family she'd adopted in her later years. Marcus was arguing with the television about baseball statistics, his voice carrying the passionate intensity of someone who'd found peace in small pleasures. Agent Chen was probably reviewing case files at the dining room table, her father's medal propped nearby as inspiration and reminder. It was the sound of home, the sound of people who'd chosen each other, protected each other, redeemed each other through the simple act of refusing to give up when things got difficult. The sound of voices raised not in anger, but in discussion, laughter, the comfortable disagreements of people secure enough to express different opinions. Antonio pulled his daughter close, breathing in the miracle of family found rather than family born. The scent of her shampoo mixed with the lingering aroma of Sophia's cooking and the city air 30 floors below. For a man who'd spent decades surrounded by the smell of fear and violence, the simple domesticity of the moment felt revolutionary. Tomorrow, Alina would start her sophomore year of college, armed with internship opportunities at victim services organizations and letters of recommendation from professors who saw her potential. Agent Chen would continue building cases that honored her father's memory, while slowly letting Marcus convince her that she deserved happiness alongside justice. Marcus would probably teach them all some new variation of poker, claiming his physical therapy required dexterity exercises that suspiciously resembled gambling. Sophia would feed them too much and love them too fiercely, already planning Christmas decorations in August and Easter menus in October. And Antonio Vento, former crime boss turned grateful father, would wake up every morning, amazed that redemption had arrived, wearing the face of a girl thrown away by people too blind to see her worth. He'd go to his legitimate office, solve legitimate problems, build legitimate relationships, and return each evening to a home filled with people who loved him not despite his past, but because of how far he'd traveled from it. The adoption. Papers on the kitchen table weren't just legal documents. They were promises, commitments, declarations that family was something you built rather than something you inherited. They represented the radical notion that love could triumph over blood, that choice could overcome circumstance, that even the most broken people could find their way to wholeness if they were brave enough to keep trying. Some stories, he realized, really did have happy endings. You just had to be brave enough to choose them, every single day, one decision at a time.